Where should investors look as a first call in the second half?
Yeah, like you said, it's been a pretty rough first half for investors, especially in the equity sector. Yeah, so looking forward now, we've seen the stock market, let's say December last year, January this year, hit an all-time high, and against consensus, we were thinking, okay, say about March, April, before the market starts tapering off the profits. But, since February, it's pretty much been on the downward slope.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm looking at the year-to-date now, 1.79.
Exactly. Yeah, so, I mean, we actually expect the market to kind of have a rebound, even though not as expected in the earlier part of the year because of elections coming up and all that, but because the valuations are pretty good, and compared to the peers in African countries, it's still a very good buy.
But do you think that's enough? Because I know that investors, especially foreign portfolio investors, I mean, that's one of the reasons why they've been here for so long. Yeah. They know that they know that the valuations and the fundamentals are strong. But I'm just thinking, with all that's happening with the U.S. Fed, the ECB, and normalization of monetary policy, out in developed markets, would valuations be enough for them to keep their money here when 10-year U.S. Treasury is doing somewhere around 3%, and then they're looking at political risk as an additional risk for them here? Yeah,
you make a good point, Esther. Yeah, valuation isn't enough, but then again, you also have interest rates coming down in Nigeria. So even if they're coming into Nigeria, we have the forex market, which has been stable for a while now, and foreign reserves still rising. So there's still a strong argument for investments in Nigerian equities.
Okay, so let's talk specifics now. For equities, where should investors be looking?
Well, the mainstays are still the banking sector. The valuations are pretty good, and
when you say banks, because there's also cherry picking. Yeah.
Okay. So the first tier and parts of the second tier banks. So some of them are actually still good. So yeah, we look at those ones and maybe the likes of Dangote Cement and a few other stocks.
Let's talk. I mean, for sectors that usually benefit from the budgets, especially the construction guys, cement makers, the Dangote Cement, the Lafarge Africa. I mean, we're hoping that the budget, the president was sent to the budget this week. We hear Wednesday. Yeah. Fingers crossed. Would you say that has been a big setback for them, or investors who invest in these stocks, who would usually position ahead of the release of capital votes?
Yes. It must have been a big setback. So looking forward, if the budget is passed, say tomorrow, we expect a stronger second half of the year because projects will roll out for them and all that.
What about the real estate? I know you're also big on the real estate.
Yes, we advise clients on that because especially in Lagos, the real estate is actually growing. It hasn't been as buoyant as the past few years, but it's actually picking up. And major projects, Atlantic City coming up. I mean, it's coming up.
Just for the corporate side, on the are you talking residential?
Corporate and residential. Okay. Yeah, a lot of projects coming up around the free trade zone. So we have lots of residential estates coming up and developments coming up. I think the real estate sector is actually picking up in Lagos.
Okay, but residential versus, because I know that there's some grade A office spaces that are also coming up. I've seen a couple of them. Yeah. Would you say that there's strong demand for those?
Yes, there are actually strong demand for them, and especially from the international and major corporate clients. The strong demand, and also the residential side. Majorly the middle class and lower income, there is strong. The demand actually outstrips the supply. For the middle class, say about 5 to 1, and low income earners, say about 20 to 1. So it's just for the residential side, it's just on the high-end luxury apartment that supply actually outstrips demand. But if the developers can focus more on the middle end and yeah.
What about agro-processing? I know you also talked about agro-processing.
Yes, I mean, it's key because we're really talking about agricultural sector and all that. So it's important that, if you're looking at that, and especially maybe FDI is coming into the country, they can look at the tax incentives and that, setting up a manufacturing plant for agro-processing. We have about 200 million people in Nigeria. There's always going to be the need for food and all that. So there's some areas that,
Do you think investors are already looking at this? Why do you say that? Because, I mean, from your perspective, you see that, or you've seen actual movements by investors taking a look at that sector?
Yes, we have. And for instance, like a couple of years ago when there was the tomato paste scarcity. If we had lots of those processing plants, we probably won't have that situation. And this kind of scarcities will not be common in Nigeria.
Okay, but overall, for the second half of the year, who do you think will be the biggest winners? Those investors, what would set the investors, the savvy investor, apart from the investor perhaps who decided to take more risk? I don't know.
Yeah, well, you have to take the risk to be able to gain the opportunity. So I think what is careful selection, careful analysis, careful research, and you just have to go for whatever you believe is.
But in your opinion, staying with the banks, that would be a safe bet?
Yeah, that's a safe bet.
All right, Niyi, thank you so much for your perspective.